Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I am doing a wrap-up of all the books that I read in April. I completed 7 books in April, and I'm also in the middle of like 3 books right now, 2 of which are nonfiction, and those are The Sinner and the Saint by Kevin Birmingham and Letters and Papers from Prison by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And I'm also in the process of reading The Lost Apothecary right now. So those are kind of my books I have in process. None of those are counted in this wrap up. So out of the books that I read, I had 3 middle grade, 2 classics, although one of those middle grades I would say is a middle grade classic. I also had 1 nonfiction and 1 historical fiction. My reading month was kind of all over the place with 2.5 stars all the way up to 5 stars, and I had several 5 stars this month. So overall, it was a fairly decent reading month. Also, I didn't have any DNFs this month, which is great because it feels like every month there's been like 1 DNF, and I didn't have any this month. So that's good. I'm going to discuss the books that I read in like ascending star order. So I'm going to start with the lowest that I rated all the way up to my favorite book of the month. So the first book that I completed this month is actually one I would have DNF'd if I hadn't been buddy reading it. And that's News of the World by Paulette Giles. I read this with my friend Dia from Novel Idea, and this book underwhelmed me greatly, unfortunately. It's really sad. So this is a historical fiction about a man who in Texas kind of travels from city to city, and he brings the news to these cities because they're unable to get papers in a timely manner. He stumbles across this girl who was kidnapped by Native Americans and lived with them for I think 4 years, and then the Native Americans like brought her back or whatever. So now they're going to return this girl to her family, and the main character, Captain Kidd, decides that he is going to take this girl all the way from like the north of Texas where he is all the way down to where her family is. So it follows their journey. The premise of the story was super interesting. In particular, I loved the whole idea of these children who had been kidnapped by Native Americans and then kind of assimilated into the Native American culture. But then when these children were returned to their American families, they were unable to adjust back. And there's an author note in the back where she actually mentions some nonfiction books that she used to research this topic. And this is something that was really, really common. And that's really interesting to me. But it's a shame. I feel like the writing style did not make it as interesting to me as it could have been. This is a very short book, around 200 pages, and I felt like so much of it was really written in a way that was very dull. When I was reading it with Dia, she put into words what I was trying to figure out. She said it felt like a bare bones screenplay that then the actors could come in and kind of make their own more. It kind of felt unfinished that way. It felt like the characters were not fully fleshed out, and then it's very time jumpy and lots of rushed moments. I will say that about halfway through the book it got a little bit better for me, but I still really honestly did not enjoy this. Part of the issue too that I didn't enjoy it for as well is that there's absolutely no quotation marks in this book at all, and this is the first book that I've ever read like that, unless it's like streams of consciousness writing. This is not. So it makes it really difficult because it's hard to differentiate sometimes who is speaking because there's no quotation marks at all. And it even makes it difficult to differentiate between speech and thought because it's not like the thoughts are italicized. So sometimes it's hard to figure out, okay, did this person actually say this or were they just thinking it? So overall, I liked the idea of the story. And so it kind of got like 2 stars for that, and then it got a little bit better throughout, so I gave it another half star, but I can't even give this 3 stars, unfortunately, because there's no way I would have finished this book if I hadn't been buddy reading it. The next book that I have on this list was a 3-star, and that's The Great Gilly Hopkins by Katherine Paterson. I apparently have a complicated relationship with Katherine Paterson where I don't enjoy her books. Is that complicated? There were things about this book that I really enjoyed. So This book is about a little girl, Gilly, whose mother has left her and she's ended up in foster care, and she's jumped from family to family. And so she kind of has down pat what she does when she goes to a new school or a new family, and she puts on this tough act and is honestly really mean and awful because she's trying to keep people out. She comes to this new family, and it's just very interesting how the story plays out. And I liked the overall message. I liked the growth of Gilly. I like her relationship that developed with this foster family. But there were big issues that I had with this book, especially considering that this is a middle grade book. First of all, there's a decent smattering of language in this book. That really bothers me in middle grade because those books are meant for, younger kids. And I do have a child who's kind of in the mid-range of middle grade, so perhaps I see it differently. I think that a child 12 and up obviously would probably, I think, get more out of this book. But also, like, Gilly is really, really terrible to everyone around her, and it makes sense why she is. This book is written in third person, but it feels more like first person. We feel more like we're getting all of Gilly's feelings. So, I mean, it makes sense that she's mean, but it's never really explained, like for younger kids, like that she's acting this way and this is not okay. She's also incredibly racist towards like the next door neighbor of her foster family, and that is never really like addressed or remedied, at least not in the way that I think it should be for a middle grade book. And then the ending. Catherine Patterson does not like happy endings. And I don't think that every book needs to have a happy ending, but I prefer for middle grades to have a little bit better of an ending, I guess. Kids are going to have their whole lives to be struck by the unfairness of the world and how terrible it is. And so, I don't know, I like middle grades that have a little bit more hope and happiness to them, and this one didn't really have that much. I don't know, I could be coming at it from the wrong angle. I did give it 3 stars because I did think it had some very redeemable qualities to it, but there was a lot of things about it that just kind of bugged me, to be honest. Next up is a book that I rated, I think it was 3.5 stars. And it's another book that I have complicated feelings about, and that's Lord of the Flies by William Golding. I actually had a reading vlog where I read this book and a middle grade, The Last Quintista. I will link that reading vlog because I explore my thoughts about both of them much more in depth. And I'm not gonna rehash all that here because it would be way longer of a video than it needs to be. So this is a classic that a lot of people are very familiar with. A lot of people had to read it in middle school or high school. And it's about a group of boys and their plane crashes on a deserted island. And so then they just decide to try to kind of almost like make their own government structure and try to figure out what they need to do on this island, and things fall apart. I think that this book had a lot of very valuable things to say about human nature, about the depravity of the human heart and all of that kind of stuff, and can facilitate a really great conversation, especially for Christians, about how much we need Jesus. But even if you're not a Christian, I think it does facilitate some really great conversations, has a lot of thought-provoking things about it. It was also really beautifully and vividly written. I felt like I was there on this island with these boys, which was a great thing in the beginning when they're enjoying the island. But as things go south, you also feel like you're really, really there. And it's really difficult to read the violence, the really bad things. There's a lot of stuff against animals as well. So as someone who loves kids and loves animals, this book was really hard to read. So that's why I rated it 3.5 stars. That's based more on my enjoyment than the writing itself. Next up was a middle grade classic. Well, I don't know if this is totally middle grade. This was actually a reread, and that's A Girl of the Limberlost by Jean Stratton Porter. This book is wonderful in so many ways. It's about a young girl, Elnora, and she has completed elementary school and wants to go on to high school, but her mother does not agree. She has a very strained and difficult relationship with her mother, and so in order to go to high school, she lives out in the country. She realizes that she has to pay for it, so she ends up catching these butterflies and moths and selling them in order to pay her way through school. I think that this book has a lot of wonderful things going for it. First of all, the nature descriptions are beautiful, especially the descriptions of the Limberlost, which is a swamp in Indiana. I love Elnora's character. She's kind. She has so much compassion. She has a backbone to stand up for what's right and stand up for herself, and I just really like her throughout the entirety of the story. I actually found that I liked the first half of the book better than the second half, and that was true upon a reread as well. I liked Elnora's story throughout high school more than I liked her stories of adulthood, because about halfway through the book it shifts, and then she meets this boy and there's like a romance kind of thing going on, and I had some issues with those things that would be spoilery to talk about, so I'm not going to, but that's what prevents it from being a 5-star read for me. The first time I read it, those things actually bothered me more, and I rated it 3 stars, and I rated it higher upon my reread because much more of this book was enjoyable for me than not, and obviously it was still totally worth a reread, and I pretty much never reread 3 stars, so I feel like it needs to be 4 stars for that reason. I will also say that it's kind of tough to read about the people that live in the Limberlost who are cutting down all the trees for money and setting up oil drills and oil wells and stuff because they want to make money, but you have to kind of go into this book realizing that it was written like over 120 years ago. So the ideas of conservation and stuff were definitely not the same back then as they are now. And so you just kind of have to keep that in mind, I think. Now we're into 5-star territory, and I have 3 5 stars, so that's a pretty good reading month. The first one that I'm going to mention is The Last Quintista by Donna Barber Higuera, and I might be butchering that last name, so I'm sorry. I loved this book, and again, this is the same reading vlog that I talked about Lord of the Flies, so I'm not going to go super in depth on this book because I already have in that reading vlog, so you can watch that to hear more of my thoughts. But this is a middle grade sci-fi with a lot of Mexican heritage in it. It has a lot of Mexican folk tales and all that kind of stuff, which I really, really loved. I'm not generally a big sci-fi person, and I still really loved this. So I think that this is one that you would enjoy, even if you're not really into sci-fi. So this follows a young girl, Petra, and she and her family are boarding this spaceship because a meteor or comet or something is about to collide with Earth. So they take a few hundred of Earth's most brilliant people. So her parents, I think her mother is a botanist and her father is a paleontologist. So they're taking all these brilliant people and they're bringing them to this planet that they found where they think that it can sustain life, and they're going to try to save humanity in this way. So Petra and her family are put into hypersleep for the hundreds of years that it takes them to get to this new planet. So this was a really wonderful book. So much of this book is about the power of story and how important story is, how important individuality is, and how important history is. That we can't just erase the difficult things from the past because we won't ever learn from them. And so I just really loved the message that this book had to say, and I thought that it was so well written. I really enjoyed it. I finished the entire thing within 24 hours, which doesn't happen often for me. Like, I really just could not put this book down, and I absolutely loved it. My next 5-star was the one nonfiction that I finished, even though I'm working through several others, and that is Watchman Nee's Sit, Walk, Stand. So this is Watchman Nee's reflection upon Ephesians. So the sit, walk, stand is about like that we are seated with Christ, how we walk out our Christian life, and how we stand against the attacks of the enemy. And so this was just a really wonderful book. It's really short. It's only like 60 pages, and I'm ashamed at how long it took me to finish it based on how short it was. But I also just felt like I couldn't fly through it. It was just so deeply written, and so much of it was so thought-provoking, and I just really loved it. I don't really know what else to say about it. I'll share a little quote to whet your appetite. So this is from the first chapter, and it says, "There is no limit to the grace God is willing to bestow upon us. He will give us everything, but we can receive none of it except as we rest in Him." So This is an amazing book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And then the last book that I want to mention is also a 5-star and is definitely by far my favorite book of the month. And that is Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens. This is actually a reread. I read this once in high school. I think I was like 15 maybe. And then I read it in my early 20s, and now here I am reading it in my 30s. So apparently this is a book that needs to be visited every decade of my life. I buddy read this one with Rainy from Rainy Day Reads and Amy of Hearthridge, and oh my word, I can't even tell you how much I love this book. The whole entire thing felt like coming home because it's been a while since I have read a Dickens. Well, when I say a while, Victober was the last time I read a Dickens, but I didn't love the Dickens that I read. And it kind of made me rethink. I was like, maybe I don't love Dickens as much as I thought I did because everyone loves Bleak House and I didn't love it. And so I was just kind of like, maybe I don't love his writing as much as I used to. Apparently that's not true because I loved every single second of Our Mutual Friend. It's kind of hard to describe the plot because Dickens' plots are very convoluted. So we start out usually with a very large cast of characters and they're all kind of doing different things, and then Dickens brings them all together in this crescendo in the end where all their paths cross together and he resolves every plot point and everyone usually gets a pretty just ending. But the main plot point of this story, I guess, is an old man, Mr. Harmon, has passed away and he has left all of his money to his son if his son will marry a certain woman. And the son is abroad. He had very strained relations with his father. And upon his return, you know, they find a body in the river. And so it looks like he has passed. And so everything else then goes to Mr. Harmon's servants. So you're kind of following like the will, you're following all this money. And money is really the central theme in this book because that's kind of what Dickens does, is he kind of tackles a certain thing that he wants to talk about and then uses a story to do that. So in this case, he wants to talk about the corrupting power of money and kind of like the falsity and pretension that can come with wealth. So yeah, so we follow a lot of different people. We follow a family, a man who is a boater on the Thames, and he actually takes dead bodies out of the river and basically robs the dead bodies and then turns them into the police for like a reward. So that's, you know, one person that we follow. We follow the young lady who was supposed to marry Mr. Hartman's son and then come into all this money, and how the thought of that has like kind of corrupted her. We follow this couple, the Veneerings, who are just like these wealthy socialite people, and their shallow relationships with people. And so, you know, we just follow a lot of different characters. My favorite thing about Dickens is his character work, and so I really liked seeing the journey of so many of these characters, the growth of so many of these characters. Just such a joy to read this book. And before I reread this, I was thinking, you know, this used to be one of my favorite Dickens. Our Mutual Friend and Great Expectations were two of my favorites. And I actually reread Great Expectations last fall and really loved it. But it does have a different narrative style than a lot of other Dickens. It's written in first person. It doesn't have quite as many characters. It follows more of a straight plot line because it is in first person, as opposed to this one that's just kind of like all over the place, and Bleak House was the same. So after reading Bleak House, I was like, maybe I just don't love this as much, all these different plot points and stuff. But having reread this, I'm like, no, I do. This is still one of my favorite Dickens. I love it so much. So this was just a wonderful one to read. Well, those are the books that I completed for the month of April. And overall, I enjoyed a lot of the books that I read. There was only one that I like really didn't like, and then two that I was just kind of meh over. So the other 4 books that I read, I absolutely loved. And since I was reading Our Mutual Friend for most of the month, it made me feel like I was having a really good reading month because I literally enjoyed every page of that. And even though I didn't participate in any big reading challenges, I did still fulfill a couple of things. 2 of the books that I read, News of the World and Great Gilly Hopkins, are from my Read or Rid project, and both of those fulfilled different prompts. News of the World was fulfilling March's prompt for the Read Your Bookshelf Challenge, and the Great Gilly Hopkins fulfilled April's prompt for Buzzwordathon. Lord of the Flies was off my Classics TBR for 2022 and also fulfilled the prompt for Read Your Bookshelf Challenge for the month of April. So I would call this reading month a success overall. I would love to hear from you in the comments down below. What have you been reading lately? Do you have a favorite book or a couple of favorite books from April that you really enjoyed? Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me. And I will see you again next time.